Yes, friend. It's OGP, the one giant podcast on a Friday. I'm Adam Arbrecht, also covering the Brooklyn Nets over on the Locked On Nets podcast. He's Andy Makowitz, sun shining, deep V from the state of Florida, and season generational ticket holder for the New York Football Giants. How are we, sir?
You know, Adam, it's my last week down in Florida. We actually fly back tomorrow, so the Sunshine State will be no more for me. But you know what? Like during the week, I'm like, hey, listen, it's in between the Super Bowl. I'm gonna go drive a couple hours to the coast and go play some golf.
Sure.
And who would have known that it was going to be like the earth-shattering, game-breaking news around the league, and especially for the Giants the week in between the Super Bowl, right?
Just you want to have a solid news cycle, and we're not being dismissive of it, obviously. The news, and listen, I'm going to couch this in a couple of different things. First off, we didn't do as many episodes this week. There was just a lot going on, and in some ways, it felt like a good thing to not have done some episodes here because it comes out after the interview process is complete. The Giants have hired Brian Flores as the head coach, and they start to get into building a coaching staff, which we're going to cover here in a minute. But then Brian Flores, who was considered to be the next candidate, if not Daboll, it was going to be Brian Flores. That's all the impressions that we get. We had heard early on that John Mara had reached out to Flores immediately after being let go by Miami and saying, we want to bring you in. We really want to get you in the building. Flores comes out, and amongst this whole spectrum, it's first and foremost a class action lawsuit against the NFL, against the Miami Dolphins, against the Giants, and also the Broncos, going back to his experiences when he was interviewed for the head coaching vacancy in Denver as well from a few years ago. The first piece is, we've seen this, we know this. There's only one black head coach in the league right now. It's Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh with the Steelers, obviously. There's clearly an issue with how the Rooney Rule is constructed, the way that it gets implemented, and whatever it is underlying, which could be a level of racism inside of the NFL or in the hierarchy in these ownership groups that prevent black coaches or any minority from having a good opportunity to actually land these gigs. That's a real thing, and it shouldn't be the case, and you want to see it move past this. The other side, I mean, you can chime in there before we get to what the other side of this is.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. The majority of players in the NFL are black. They are a minority, right? That is clear. And the fact that only one current head coach is a person of color is an issue. And when you zoom out and you actually look at that, it's pretty sad. Like it clearly shows that there is something wrong. And you talk about the Rooney Rule. For all of the good intent it has had since its inception in 2003, it does feel like you have these situations like Brian Flores is detailing about his experience in Denver, where he feels like it was a token interview just to check a box and be able to move things along. And that's really the opposite of what these things are supposed to do.
100%. So inside of this, I think to me, and I'm not being dismissive of it because it's the New York Giants and because it's my team. By the way, the Giants, don't have a great track record of black head coaches or black quarterbacks, right? Like there's things that you can point to, but it's not this. These aren't one-to-one correlations of because you haven't had this, it then means that you must be intentionally trying to avoid it, right? John Mara, the Giants organization, came out with a very detailed explanation about the process that they went through, that they legitimately viewed Brian Flores as a candidate for the head coaching role, and that they feel terrible if there's this misconception, but also completely deny the idea that this was just a product of bringing him in to check a box. The other stuff that comes out here, there's the Denver piece of it, and that goes back a few years. John Elway came out and voiced his disagreement against what Flores accounted there as well. The Miami piece is the most interesting one to me because we've said in this interview process when we were saying, what is Flores going to have to answer for inside of his interviews? It's going to be, what the heck was going on down in Miami, right? You get fired. There's all this turnover with the coaching staff. You don't like Tua. Did you like Tua? Whatever the case may be. If there are things, there can be truths and false narratives here underneath this umbrella. But it seems like there could be some element of truth to the fact that Miami was looking to tank themselves out of this season, and that maybe Flores, we've heard Hugh Jackson has come out around this too in his time in Cleveland, was being incentivized not to win games. I don't want to be dismissive of anything that Flores is bringing up. Are there elements to this story that you think have maybe more traction and more validity than other pieces of it? Or the other side of it is, again, and not to cast it in a negative light, that Flores does not land a head coaching job. He sees a little bit of the writing on the wall that I came out of a bad situation in Miami, and this may be my only opportunity, right? And it can be that a massive positive comes out of what Flores is doing right now, even if everything that he is detailing does not end up being, I'm going to say, not factual in the sense that the Giants were legitimately considering him. Denver legitimately considered him. That would be factual, that they wanted him to be a head coaching candidate, and that there is this systemic problem within the NFL.
All right, so let me take
It's a lot.
one quick step back, because
Sure.
there is so much meat on this bone, and that's why every single media outlet is going to run with this thing for a good 72 hours,
Yep.
and then you probably won't hear about it until the offseason. But you mentioned the three teams that are listed in this class action lawsuit, and that is the Giants, the Dolphins, and the Broncos. And the interesting thing, and I want to give 20 seconds on each one, because there is some nuance as to the difference between why these teams are named.
Mhm.
So in 2019, he was interviewing for the head coaching job of the Denver Broncos, and he alleges that they didn't take his meeting seriously. John Elway, the general manager and the president at the time, showed up an hour late, disheveled, hungover, smelling like booze, basically, and were like not interested and didn't really take Brian Flores' interview seriously. You said John Elway has come out after that and said that's really disappointing. This is the first time ever hearing of it. We never spoke about it ever again. So you have that as one kind of issue. The second one that you mentioned is the Dolphins one, and to that point, I think I'll touch on that last, maybe because that one has the most meat and like the most substance of all of them. The Giants one, our good friend Bill Belichick basically did the wrong text message to the wrong former assistant coach named Brian and was like, "Hey, I'm hearing good things." And Brian Flores is like, "What are you hearing?" He's like, "You got that New York job." And he's like, "Coach, I haven't even interviewed for it yet." And coach is like, "Well, my bad. I'm hearing that they're going with Daboll." And so that's the Giants piece, which I don't know. That's just kind of hearsay. Like Bill Belichick talking to someone and they're like, "Oh, we really like Brian Daboll." Like, how are they ever going to like corroborate that one, right?
Yeah, and by the way, that's something that the Giants mentioned in their statement. Bill Belichick has no connection, does not represent the Giants organization. And to your point, like even though you can read the tea leaves on some of these things when they say, "Here's the text message exchange I had," the text message exchange says like, "Here they're going with him." As in, to your point, as in maybe I talked to John Mayer and he said we really like Daboll, or Joe Schoen is really high on Daboll. He's going to be, as we've talked about the whole entire time, he's the leader in the clubhouse. Somebody has to knock him off that pedestal. If you think, regardless of background, that every time there's an opening in the league, you have a thought of who would be your ideal candidate. Of course, everybody does. Everybody has the person they're thinking about hiring, and then you go through the process. Continue.
Of course, if you're Brian Flores, you're furious when you get that text message. You're like, "I'm going to fly up to New York and I have to meet with these people, and
Right.
they already decided that this is the guy." So I completely understand why Flores is upset. The Giants, and most people presume it's Pat Hanlon who came out with the statement. They basically completely knocked this away and said, "Look at what we set up for Brian Flores when he came in. He met Joe Schoen immediately. Then he met with Steve Tisch and John Mara. Then he met, he met with a whole host, maybe a dozen different front office people for the Giants over a 6 or 7 hour period." And it's like, hey, listen, if this was just like a check the box thing, we wouldn't go through this whole entire thing. There wouldn't be reports saying that John Mara, if he had his way, would prefer to hire Brian Flores over Daboll, but finally he's getting his hands off this and letting Joe Schoen do what he wants. So
Right.
this one feels a lot like the Denver one, where it's very like anecdotal, hearsay. Like, I don't know, is there much substance to it? The Dolphins one, if this proves to be true, there is going to be huge ramifications for Miami, because Brian Flores has said in 2019, the owner, Stephen Ross, came out to him and said, "If you lose games, I will pay you an extra $100,000 per game that you lose," because they wanted to tank, because they wanted to get a top quarterback. They wanted to just go as low as possible because they knew that they weren't going to really compete. And they figured, hey, a good quarterback can either jumpstart this or make the franchise worth more money. And Adam, there is other people who are corroborating and have signed affidavits saying they were there when Stephen Ross said this. Like,
Yep.
they were in the room, that Hamilton, in the room where it happened. Like, they were there when that happened. And so if that's true, and there's multiple people corroborating that, there's going to be two things that happen. One is Stephen Ross is going to be asked to sell the team for sure. Like, no doubt about it. And the second thing is they are going to take away so many draft picks and so much money. It's going to be like, this is like a show cause penalty in the NCAA. Like, they could wipe the Dolphins off the face of the earth for the next 10 years if this ends up being true.
Yeah, and there are two very separate narratives coming out of this thing. And if that's the case too, listen, you talk about the implications around betting, right? And the integrity of the game, the shield, all this stuff. And unfortunately, the NFL does not have a great track record on, on being forthcoming with this information. This is why, whether it's Miami and their response to the accusations, the Giants, Denver, all this stuff, when everyone comes out with these, across the board denials, we had nothing to do with this, you just go, well, guys, we can all be a little self-reflective here, and it'll be interesting to see what else comes out around it. The last thing I'll say is, man, over the course of doing this podcast, there's been a lot of serious things that have come up connected to the NFL. I don't want to say that, we've been overly serious around this stuff or too dismissive around it when we've done it, but I'm also just going to be self-acknowledging here. Like, I'm not the expert on this stuff. I agree with a lot of the sentiments around what Flores is communicating. There's obviously flaws in the way the NFL is run. There's flaws in the way society is run, and hopefully there's positive stuff that comes out of this. But that I had to leave it there because otherwise I think I sound like a bit of a pompous asshole.
It's pretty simple. I think that there is systemic racism in the NFL, right. And I do think that the Rooney Rule is broken, and there needs to be a better way to get minority coaches better opportunities rather than, we gotta interview one guy, let's just call the next guy on the list type of thing.
Yep.
But both can be true where that is happening, and it is good that this class action lawsuit is coming, but also that maybe Brian Flores, having disagreements with the GM in Miami, clearly is not happy about what's gone on different places, had 3 or 4 different offensive coordinators in Miami, got fired at the end of the season. Like, he may not be the perfect vehicle for this entire lawsuit. Names we've talked about before. I think David Culley, who did as much as he possibly could in Houston when they traded all their good players. They benched Deshaun Watson. They give him a 3rd-round rookie, and they're like, go out and just see what you can do. And his players played hard for him the entire time. And he gets canned in his first opportunity, and they say everybody loved him. And now they're talking about going with Josh McCown, who's never actually coached ever in the history of his career. It's like he's a way better vehicle, but at the same time, both can be true. There is a problem. Brian Flores isn't the perfect example, but it's good that this is out there now to at least get the conversations going.
Yep, 100%. So we'll leave that there, and we'll see if anything else comes of it. And if anything pertaining to the Giants comes out, we'll obviously update that. On a different and more positive side, the New York Football Giants have been moving forward under Joe Schoen, bringing in people to the organization from time in Buffalo, and then obviously Daboll as well when it comes to the coaching staff. Right off the top, we talk about Laura Young. She was hired in as the director of coaching operations, was previously with the Buffalo Bills in a different capacity. But this, to me, you'll give the details on it, is an indication that Joe Schoen is looking at Buffalo, remembering the things that were successful and worked there, and trying to bring it to the Giants, because this is a created new position with the Giants, i.e., there was a gap in terms of what needs to get covered here. Let's go ahead and get that fixed.
Yeah, so Laura Young is an interesting hire. It's the first female coaching hire that the Giants have ever had. So kudos, tip of the cap. We just talked about some of the stuff with the Giants being named in a lawsuit. Here are the Giants progressing and getting a little bit more with the times by having a female in a prominent position with the coaching staff. So it's interesting because we don't necessarily know what Laura Young's entire role is going to be, because as you mentioned, this is a newly created position. But what I can say is her responsibility in Buffalo was essentially players transitioning from being drafted. They've never been to the state of New York, let alone Buffalo before. Like, how do you get them acclimated? How do you get them housing? How do you get them to where they live? And then more recently, over the last year and a half, has been, how do we navigate the pandemic effectively for these players? How do we make sure that they have everything they need in their homes, travel safety, like just the safety of the team and the players in general, which has obviously been not a small task over the last 2 years, considering the NFL continues to try to move on with the product on the field while having this pandemic around them. So it will be interesting, the idea of the coaching operations. I'm curious to see how much of the logistics Laura is going to be taking on, but nonetheless, it's exciting. Joe Schoen recognizing a gap, recognizing really smart people that he's worked with in other places and saying, let's find a role and utilize your skill set as effectively as possible with the Giants.
Yeah, listen, he said it in his introductory press conference, right? Being thoughtful, building relationships. I mean, a lot of cliche statements, but guess what? Like, this is how you back up those words when you say, I want to get into this building. I want to make sure that the way that we communicate with players, the support systems we put in place are all serving their functions. And, this makes me think back to, Dave Gettleman when they say, what about, scouting and analytics? And he goes, yeah, we got computers. Like, that's the dismissive response. We go, yeah. We got some things, we're working on something. This is actions, right? This is words to actions in terms of improving. We think, right? As excited as we all are, these are the steps we think are going to help improve things.
Well, we mentioned it before. I think it was Tiki and Tierney. Joe Schoen went on to the show and was like, so how were you going to change things here? And it was like Joe Schoen's first interview. He's like, well, the draft room, for one, is like, we're taking all the Post-it notes down. And they're like, you're like, what? He's like, yeah, like they had all their people with like Post-it notes stuck onto a whiteboard with like, he's like, we're just going to go digital with it and like have flat screens where you can do all this on computers. And everyone's laughing, but like, that's how old these traditions were. And It's like, hey, how can we just do this more efficiently? As opposed to like, I really like moving this sticky note up one or down one. It's like, hey, how about you just click a button on a computer? And like, so he is practicing what he's preaching. He's bringing in smarter, innovative people. He's changing things up. He's creating new roles like he has with Laura Young. I mean, how could you not like what's been going on with Joe Schoen since he started?
No, you have to love the direction they're taking it. And listen, as I write on a white notepad here.
Hey, but you're not the GM of the Giants, right? Like that's not,
Touche, sure, sir. However, we are doing this podcast via the internet, not writing down our responses and then posting that on a sticky. The other side of this stuff is then, of course, the big task of creating the coaching staff underneath Brian Daboll. The Giants lose out on Ken Dorsey, a handshake agreement to come on as the OC. He ends up staying in Buffalo. This was kind of that back and forth speculation around, what's the best situation for him? Just quickly, I think it makes sense for him. While I would have liked him, it makes sense for him to stay in Buffalo because if you come to New York and you try to reclimate Daniel Jones or be a part of this process, it could take you a couple of years to confirm that you are good at this thing that you do and then elevate yourself into some head coaching candidacy possibly. In Buffalo, one more year could end up being what gets you there because all you have to do is say, Daboll's gone. I'll do it again with Josh Allen, and then you know that I'm just as capable.
I think the simple answer on this is we would have loved to have Ken Dorsey as part of the roster, keep the continuity, make it Buffalo South here because they've been doing things the right way the last few years. Simple thing is this for Ken Dorsey. He takes over as the offensive coordinator. In Buffalo, he's got a defensive-minded head coach who's going to let Ken Dorsey call the plays, which seems to be the huge indicator of whether or not you're going to be able to be a head coach or run a team in the future. So if he was going to move with Brian Daboll has already said that he would really want to call plays here. So Ken Dorsey would just kind of be in the same spot he was in Buffalo without having the ability to call plays. And then they'll say, well, Brian Daboll's calling all the shots wherever you are. How do we know that you have the ability to do it?
And suffering a little bit, maybe the way Eric Bieniemy has suffered right underneath in Kansas City there, under Andy Reid, because you're like, well, oh no, he's great. No, he said it. No, Andy Reid said it. He's calling the play. He's involved. He's a part of it. Same thing. Ken Dorsey has to look at that and say, what's my best chance to get credit for the product on the field? So that's that piece of it. But the Giants do go out. They bring in, they have Shea Tierney. He comes in hired as the QB coach. So they elevate someone over from that's coming from the same organization, excuse me.
It's the Buffalo Bills. It's when in doubt, just say it's the Buffalo Bills. And you got a 50-50 shot at this point, right?
Right. Check my notes. Go with the Buffalo Bills. They also brought in offensive line coach Bobby Johnson from the same role with the Buffalo Bills. And then the other team hire was Mike Kafka coming over from the Kansas City Chiefs. He's going to come in and be the offensive coordinator. The continuity piece from the guys coming over from Buffalo, that's great. Obviously, Bobby Johnson's going to be tasked with figuring out, as new talent comes into this offensive line, fixing that problem. That's been very clear for the New York Football Giants. You like having some familiarity. Again, if Daboll feels like he had success with Josh Allen, you couldn't get Ken Dorsey, but you still have somebody that was in the room helping develop this quarterback. That's another good sign. Mike Kafka, what's your takeaways on him? There were some other guys involved, including Pep Hamilton, in this candidacy that I want to get to in a second, but takeaways on bringing in a guy that's obviously been working with one of the best talents in the league, Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, so I think this is actually a really good hire for the Giants, and the reason why is because the tough part is all the names that everybody knows are already offensive coordinators other places. So if you're not going to promote them to the head coach, they're not going to leave their situation. Look at Ken Dorsey. Like he's like, I'm not even going to leave, because I can't. I got the offensive coordinator position up in Buffalo. It's part of the knock on Eric Bieniemy. We'd love to have him as our offensive coordinator and test it out, but
Mhm.
we can't because he's not going to leave Kansas City unless he gets a head coaching gig. Mike Kafka being the quarterback coach, he started as an assistant in 2017 when Alex Smith was the quarterback, and they had drafted Mahomes and they were slowly transitioning. He became the quarterback coach in 2018 when Patrick Mahomes started full time, as opposed to the little cameo that he had at the end of 2017. And he's never looked back. Obviously Mahomes is arguably the best quarterback in the league right now, and Kafka gets glowing reviews from everyone. There's a few things I saw online. I'll try to give credit if I can remember, but there was a couple of unnamed players that are like, Mike is a super smart guy. He's a quarterback. He knows how to play football. He played football at Northwestern. He was in the NFL. He will be a head coach one day. They have no doubt that he's going to be able to call plays. Like, he is a super smart guy. It seems like, if you're the Giants and you're going to say, let's align to the person that was helping to groom Josh Allen, and then let's get the quarterback coach for Patrick Mahomes. You could do worse than that in the coaching cycle than those two guys who are considered two of the maybe 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in the league.
Yeah. I'm gonna do spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down here a little bit. I think it's a great hire. We know the success that Patrick Mahomes has had, that Kansas City has had, and then likewise going back to Daboll, right? All the success that they've had there. I think that when you look at Josh Allen, you look at this kid that came in with a lot of raw skills and that you molded and really improved on, right? We talked about taking that completion percentage and bringing it up, really developing a system. If I wanted to give you, because I'm going to get to Pep Hamilton here, if I wanted to push back, I think it's good that Kafka was there as an assistant when Alex Smith was having kind of the renaissance of his late career there before they went ultimately to Patrick Mahomes. If I wanted to push back on it, I would say, while you're not going to take one game out and make that the referendum on someone. For as elite of a talent, maybe the best quarterback in the game that Patrick Mahomes is right now, when you looked at that last game that they lost to the Cincinnati Bengals, I think the one area that you point to is a lack of development for Patrick Mahomes in refining his game. He's a guy that is so talented. He can do it whenever he wants, run the off script plays, throw the off angle deliveries of his passes. But when he's scrambling around, right, overextending plays instead of throwing it away to live another down, instead of avoiding some deep and ugly passes down the field, always wanting to make it happen. This isn't, again, a referendum on Kafka, but I can look at it and say, you were given an incredibly talented, naturally gifted. It's like the Aaron Rodgers, right? Like, this dude just has it. He's one of the best athletes at the position. Now, what you do with that talent, and he's had a lot of success and won a Super Bowl. So I'm not, again, take it for what it's worth, but I can look at it and say, you're living on the incredibly high level talent of Patrick Mahomes. And maybe I haven't seen, it's still early for Mahomes, but I haven't seen the refinement that you want that would take him from being an elite talent and incredibly naturally gifted to then, if he puts it together, you can do what Tom Brady did because you're far more talented than Tom Brady is from a pure skill set, athleticism standpoint. That would be my one pushback before I get to Pep Hamilton. You can shoot me down. I know you will. I know I'll take slings and arrows.
No, well, it's tough because when you talk about Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, and Mike Kafka,
I know. It's a great.
like, but also it's like, all right, they've gotten to 4 AFC Championship games, they've won a Super Bowl, they've been to 2. Mahomes has been playing at an MVP level for at least 3 out of those 4 years, and it's like, when we talk about the one knock, who does it go against? They could be teaching this to Mahomes in practice, and he just gets out there and he's like, I just want to throw the deep ball to Tyreek Hill. I don't want to take the short route because I have all the arm talent in the world and I can fit it into these throws. I mean, they showed one of those side views of Mahomes throwing a ball in the Buffalo game where, like, he dropped his arm down and threw a sinker, so it went underneath the guy's arm, but
Right.
it started bending into where Tyreek Hill was running. It's like he does unfathomable things. And so knowing that he can do that, it's really tough. I'm sure it's probably pretty challenging to be a coach and be the quarterback coach to say, hey, Patrick, you have to take the 5-yard route because you can't do this. And he's like, I
Right.
can't do what? Like, what are you talking about? But I think it's interesting. You bring up Pep Hamilton. I know you have more details on it. I wasn't going to be upset either way. Either you have an established guy that's worked with a lot of quarterbacks, or you have the guy that's up and coming that people are saying is a smart offensive mind that will eventually be a head coach. It's like, which route do you want to take?
Yeah, when you talk about Pep Hamilton this past year, you mentioned David Culley before, right? He was there working with Davis Mills, a third-round quarterback, maximizing the value you get out of him. Now, again, where does all the credit go, right? Maybe this is a kid that people overlook, but work with him there. He was there in with the Chargers organization when they drafted Justin Herbert. He was there with Andrew Luck, both at college at Stanford and then traveling on with him with the Indianapolis Colts. He was also there with Alex Smith late in his run to help try to put him with the 49ers, early in his run, I should say, when they're building up this quarterback that you could look at and say, here's a guy that he's good. He's got some skill sets, but feels like a journeyman, feels like a game manager, and maybe maximizing what his value could be. Baker Mayfield gets thrown in there too, but that's not really making my point. So I leave him by the wayside. But when I looked at Pep Hamilton, it was just, man, it looks like you were really good at taking talent to varying degrees and maximizing what they were. And that's something that I like in the short term of, hey, come in here and get your hands on Daniel Jones, and the long term of finding a young QB prospect you like. To your point, I'm fine with it. And I feel like I said this at every level, at GM, at head coach, and now at all these coordinators. I go, listen, when you're telling me these candidates, it really makes it easy for me to go, yeah, I'll take any of them. It's actually great, right? Like I'll take anybody you want to give and I'll feel fine with it. Maybe as I look these guys over, I thought, oh, Pep Hamilton would be really good. And it takes me that 30 seconds to go, all right, but they went with another really talented guy, and we're still looking like we're going to be set up for success.
It's interesting because when you get an offensive coordinator, you hope that he sticks around for a couple years for consistency, and maybe that would put a notch in Pep Hamilton's spot because it's like, hey, he may want to be the offensive coordinator and build for a couple years, whereas Kafka might be here for a year. Daniel Jones has success and he's gone. But
Yeah.
the Giants just want the smartest people in the room, and then you figure it out later. Like if the guy leaves because you had tremendous success, that's a good problem to have, right?
Yeah.
Like you'd rather be in that situation than, oh, we don't know what's going to happen here. Adam, the one other side note I wanted to give on the coaching hires was, a lot's been going on. Patrick Graham interviewed for the Vikings head coaching position. Would have been great for him, would have been great for the Vikings, and also would have been great for the Giants in getting a few compensatory picks for Patrick Graham getting hired. Ultimately, it sounds like Kevin O'Connell from the offensive coordinator of the Rams is going to get that job. Patrick Graham has a nice safety net where he can come back and be the defensive coordinator again for the Giants. With all this turnover, knowing the players love Patrick Graham so much, it may actually be a benefit to everyone involved. They just have a little bit of consistency on that side of the ball.
Oh, of course. I think you've seen this clear kind of narrative. Again, if he had been hired away, good for him. But right now, what you're seeing from Joe Schoen and then down the line here through the coaching staff is, hey, we feel like if we can retain Patrick Graham, the defense can be consistent. We have a lot of talent there, a lot of veteran guys. We can kind of let that simmer for a season while we correct and overhaul what has been the disastrous component of this team, the offensive side of the ball. So I think it's a really good benefit. Would I have been, dismayed if they had to find a new defensive coordinator? No, but I think it's good that you can basically push the pause button and say, hey, let's set it on cruise control, do some new little wrinkles to the defensive scheme, etc. But Patrick Graham, keep doing your thing for another year while we figure out if fixing the offense suddenly helps these two sides of the ball really balance each other out a little bit better.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And with that, I think the easiest question that I have is from GM to all these different coaching hires. If Patrick Graham finalizes his paperwork and Kafka and everybody else, what do you give this cycle for the Giants in terms of overhauling and revamping this entire thing from front office down to all the coaches?
Listen, we're grading on paper, right? That's all we can do right now. But it has to be an A. It has to be an A plus because everything that they did from the process, and I know there's this weird cloud hanging over it now, but the process that they went through, hiring a GM, building a staff, and providing, as you said, getting some of the best coaches and young minds, progressive minds from around the league to compile onto this coaching staff, they did it right. Like they finally look like they've done it the right way. And that includes John Mayer and Steve Tisch being a part of, but not taking control of the process of hiring a coach and building a staff under Joe Schoen. So proof will be in the pudding, but this has to be one of the most refreshing, resetting moments for a New York Football Giants fan base in a decade.
I've got him at an A minus.
Ooh,
You know, and the reason why I
A
say that
minus.
is
Hire Pep
because,
Hamilton. I'm gonna,
well, yeah, I mean, you kind of, as you mentioned before, you have preferences on who you wanted them to hire as the OC or the DC or different places. You know, people were talking about wanting to get Mike Munchak from the Broncos for the offensive line, even though his family lives in Denver, he wasn't going to go anywhere to begin with. There was the like blow it out of the park situation, which I think would have gotten an A plus. You know, if Patrick Graham leaves and the Giants get 2 third-round picks and we bring in Wink Martindale and then we have Pep Hamilton, groom Daniel Jones, like there's a whole host of ways where this could have been just a touch better. But again, that's
right, like
just
maybe
preference.
Peters as the GM could have been our first choice, right? And then you end up getting, instead of, I don't know, people love caviar, I guess. So done a bowl of caviar. It's just 2 big handfuls.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I love that analogy. You can tell that, the listeners can tell that Adam eats a lot of caviar by
Got 'em.
just bowlfuls or using your hands to scoop up the caviar. That's always nice. It was a beluga caviar. Was it salmon roe caviar? Like what kind of caviar, Adam?
I think it was just little balls of licorice, if I'm being honest. You could sell me $1,000 worth of chocolate nuggets, and I wouldn't know the difference.
Solid A minus for the Giants. It sounds like a lot of the big decisions have been made on the coaching staff and in the front office, which is exciting. We've got the Super Bowl coming up in a week. We've got a lot of big offseason decisions, Adam, in terms of player personnel. And then we also have the draft, man, with the Giants having 2 top 10 picks. There is going to be so much for us to talk about, but it's glad that we have the front office and the coaching staff settled and ready to tackle this.
At the end of the day, I'm one classy individual, people, and you can tell that the way I talk about stuff. We're going to break down, obviously, a little bit of the big game action coming up next weekend. I haven't even had a chance to gloat over picking the Cincinnati Bengals over top of those Kansas City Chiefs. We are neck and neck in the host battle, by the way. It all legitimately comes down to who we pick in the final matchup between the Rams and the Bengals. We'll get to all that. We'll start to break down personnel things. How does Graham sticking around impact the defensive side of the ball and some of the personnel? Who are the Giants going to look to bring in? Who are they going to steal from the Buffalo Bills in free agency potentially? We'll do it all. But in the meantime, friends, until then, you can follow us over on YouTube. Subscribe to that channel there as we continue to build things up. Andy Makowitz is going to be hot and heavy, wet and wild back north on the East Coast soon. The snow is melted away for you, good sir. And as you want, need, and may demand all the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.